All right, good morning, Summer Institute Planning Team. I'm going to go ahead and hit record.
Okay, good morning. I didn't see enough people on my screen. I was looking for Sonia. I see you now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 21st annual PBIS Summer Institute. We'll go ahead and get things started here. If you want to go to the next slide, Angie. So we are using Zoom, of course, today, and we are in the typical meeting format, so that as we have questions and things throughout the day, that you're able to ask these of presenters. So if you can please remember to stay muted, and video is optional, whatever you would like to use, and ask questions in the chat. There will be different presentations throughout the day, and we'll talk with speakers about and share at the beginning of each presentation what format they choose to have questions, but put those in the chat. You can change your view if you want to change your name and what school you are with. You can also hover over your name and do that. But that is the lay of what we're doing today. I am going to introduce our director, Sonia Smith, and she is going to get us started here this morning. So welcome, Sonia. Thank you for being here with us, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Just making sure you can hear me okay. Yes, yes. All right. Few technology difficulties over here, so please bear with me. Good morning again to the 21st Annual Minnesota PBIS Summer Institute. We are so glad you're here, and we want to thank you for your unwavering commitment to students in Minnesota. Next slide, please. So today, from our 10 Minnesota commitments to equity, we are focusing on Go Local as we highlight local implementation stories, valuing people as we value and celebrate you all today, and improve conditions for learning as we continue to implement positive behavior interventions and supports. Next slide. All righty, so we have a full agenda for you here today. After this welcome, I got a couple screens going on, so bear with me. After this welcome, we are going to have a keynote. There we go. We're going to have a keynote by Brian Meyer from Midwest PBIS Network. That'll be followed by a break, which will be followed by 2 breakout sessions where you will be able to choose the one you'd like to attend. And then we will have, looks like another break, followed by 2 additional breakout sessions. You'll again get to choose which one you want to attend. We will break for lunch, and then we will hear from Commissioner Jett, who will give us the recognition of our 24-25 exemplar schools. And you will also hear from some of our exemplar schools and teams about their PBIS implementation and what specific practices are working well in their schools. Let's see, I think followed by that, we'll have the closing. Next slide, please. So we want to thank you all for your commitment to stay focused on the work without distractions. We know that there are so many challenges that you face, so we thank you for staying focused, and we appreciate you giving it your full attention. We know that nothing changes until it changes. So we want to encourage people today to lean in. Your presence here today demonstrates that you are continuing to support your students in meaningful ways. And so for that, we celebrate you. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to look at the next slide, which shows us a little bit about our growth with PBIS. This slide illustrates the growth of PBIS over time from cohort 1 back in 2005 until the present cohort 21 in 2025. You can see steady growth in not only the number of PBIS schools in training, but also the number of schools sustaining PBIS after training. That's the dark blue bar lines you see there. Amazing work. Kudos to all of you. Next slide, please. Here we see the impact of PBIS in the state of Minnesota. 57% of our districts and charters are PBIS trained, which is 297. Around 41% of Minnesota schools are PBIS trained. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, almost 435,000 students are impacted by PBIS because of your hard work and commitment to sustaining PBIS. All of this is what the state of Minnesota gets to see and celebrate. Next slide, please. This is a reoccurring reminder that we don't do this work alone, or we're not on an island, nor should anyone else be. We ask our teams that are coming in about the aligned initiatives that they are engaged in. This slide actually highlights a few of them. We know there are many partners that we have and that you all are partnering with. All of us are coming together, and that makes for a stronger impact on the outcomes for our students. Next slide, please. So with that, I just want to extend a truly heartfelt congratulations to all of you. It takes a village to make things happen and to move mountains. And because of all of you, that's exactly what we're doing. I appreciate you. I am excited for you. And with that, I'm going to say enjoy the day. And I believe I get to turn it back over to you, Erin.
We are going to turn it over to Angie. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thank you,
Have a great day,
Sonia.
folks.
Thank you, Sonia, for the nice welcome. As Sonia mentioned, we're going to have an exemplar presentation this afternoon. You'll get to hear a little bit from Commissioner Jett and a message from our recognition work group team, and hear a little bit more about regional leadership accomplishments. Specifically, at the end, we'll highlight Eden Prairie Public Schools that will tell us more about their success with their exemplar PBIS program in their district. So we're excited to have you all come back for the afternoon after lunch if you're able for that. And then just a little fun slide. Last year, when we celebrated 20 years of PBIS, we were really excited and kind of did a pop culture slide about what was happening in the world 20 years ago. And this year, as it becomes 21 years, we realized the same things were happening in the world, just one more year had passed. So we started thinking about what people on our team were doing 21 years ago and really realizing how long PBIS has been around. So a variety of things you'll see there on the screen. Some were in secondary or middle school, all the way up to graduate school and everything in between, getting married. We had someone on our team who was starting the very first PBIS cohort training, while someone else was attending the very first PBIS cohort training, and a middle school teacher. So if you take a moment and think about where you were 21 years ago, that's really how long PBIS has been in place. And it's just a fun way to pause and think about really how long this has been working for students in schools in Minnesota. A few resources we want to share before we get to our keynote today that you can come back and access as needed. Today's PBIS Summer Institute recordings will be available on the Summer Institute webpage. We'll have the keynote along with the presentations, I believe, on Zoom link number 1. So those recordings will be made available after today. You can subscribe on YouTube. We have some directions in here to click the subscribe button on the top right, a nice big long blue arrow to show you where to go there. It'll be on the PBIS Minnesota YouTube channel. Once you're subscribed, you can access the presentations there. A different resource we'd like to share is the Center on PBIS has some highlighted resources here as far as integrating school mental health, measuring the fidelity of Tier 2 systems, and others. These overlap with some of the topics you'll hear about today, but are additional resources for you to refer back to. Also, we'd like to mention our special education department at MDE has some recorded training webinars. We've lifted up 3 here. The PBIS 101 is an awesome webinar to share back with staff if they're kind of wondering about what is PBIS and some general ideas around it. If you're more curious about ADSYS, we have a wonderful introduction to that. We also have some local implementation alignment where we have a school and a schooling behavioral health program talk about how they work together to really benefit students and improve student outcomes. And on the webpage, you'll see that new webinars are added throughout the year. We've got person-centered practices and multiple webinars there for you to access, and hopefully you do that. And again, share with staff. They're generally about an hour and can really beef up your program. Here we have just our regional support contact information. We're divided by the Metro North and South region, so please feel free to reach out to anyone on the screen or anyone on our PBIS MDE state management team. We'd be happy to help support you in your PBIS efforts. Always open to sharing your work on Facebook or X and get other ideas, or be proud of your own work and share it out there. And then really, as Sonia said, thank you for being here today. You're taking time out of your summer, which is precious time. We appreciate that you're here. We're always excited about Summer Institute. I was telling the team before we started, someone told me the other day, Happy Summer Institute, like it's a holiday, and we kind of get that excited about it. So thank you for being here and sharing in that. I'm going to turn it over to our keynote speaker, Brian Meyer from Midwest PBIS. He's the co-executive director there with experience in schools across the ages and community and traditional schools. So I would let Brian tell a little bit more about himself, but thank you for being with us today, Brian, and we're excited to hear more about MTSS.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Sonia, I was very appreciative of what you highlighted kicking us off today, and seeing this commitment that the state of Minnesota has had to this work and all of the effort from all of the people for decades, including the teachers, the educators, to do this work is exceptional. Minnesota is in a little rare company there, I think, with having such commitment over these years. So I have to say, I'm a little nervous. I always am anytime I talk, even though I've been doing this forever. But I am so appreciative of the work of Minnesota that it makes me a little more, I'll say excited. It's actually nervous, but I'll just say excited. We'll just go with that. So anyway, I'm very, very glad to be here, and I appreciate that. Let me see if I can share my screen. Give me a hot sec. How are we doing? Thumbs up from anybody? Good. Oh, look at that. The plan came together. Okay. I will ask the Minnesota team if there's anything that pops up in chat that needs my attention. If you could just help me with that as I manage a couple monitors here. Thank you. So here's the big idea for today. Anybody heard of MTSS? Hot and upcoming term. Super exciting. It's all the rage. It's both been around a really long time, and it's got some life in the last 10 years, some new energy. And I think it's really helpful to ask questions about what do we know about MTSS? What does this mean in terms of PBIS and academics? What are schools and districts to do? So I like this conversation a lot. I put together some things that have come up over the last couple of years I think might be useful in the conversation, and then let's see if there's any questions at the end. Okay, so that's the big idea for today. Let me make sure I'm sliding here. Perfect. So I am with the Midwest PBIS Network. We've been around in different iterations for a couple of decades ourselves, different names, some different folks. One thing that's been consistent is that we've been connected to the Center on PBIS since it started in 1998. And part of that charge is to support state capacity building. So one of the activities I get to engage in is participate on the Minnesota State Leadership Team, which again, I learn more from you than you will learn from me. When PBIS started in 1998, the presumption was, let's figure out how states should do this and then do that 50 times, plus territories. And the reality we have learned over the years is that's never going to happen. The local context is very important, and what's working in Minnesota is not what's going to work maybe in Illinois or Kentucky or Florida. And so because of that, again, let's honor ourselves here with this commitment that Minnesota has had, how successful it's been, the number of schools implementing, the number of students being impacted. So hats off to you guys. Okay, I like a little bit of history. I'm going to play fast and loose with the accuracy of this. Think of me as history AI. It's going to sound pretty good. Some of you might be history buffs in education, and you might find a few holes in this, but we're going to go with the spirit of this, okay? So that's what I want you to help me out with. And what I'm going to focus on here is where did this MTSS PBIS come from? And so then what does that mean now? I think it's helpful to do just a quick little look back. So I'm going to go all the way back. Before the 1950s, kids were learning in schools. Look at these. These are kids. See that? The circles, those are children. They look happy. There were no problems, I don't think, as far as we knew. Teachers were happy. The world was a great place. Am I right? I mean, that's how we always think when we go backwards. Everything was wonderful. All right, so those are kids learning. 1950s, not a care in the world. Well, okay. Some students with disabilities were not included. And so that's what we have here. Let's look at some of these students. We'll just highlight a bunch and we're going to put them in red. And we're going to say these are students with specific disabilities. And it turned out that back then, well, if you didn't fit schools, schools weren't for you. And over the course of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there was growing movement and legislation, local legislation, eventually culminating in 1975 with the Individual Disabilities Education Act. And that introduced FAPE, free and public education, into law. Very critical. It also introduced some of these ideas as well, that education should be appropriate and tailored to the student. We should focus on least restrictive environment. Parents have a role in the voice. Most importantly, schools had to educate all of their students and do that publicly. Okay, so, but here's the key. Why does this matter today? Because in terms of special education, what this helped cement and usher in and reinforce for several more decades was the idea of diagnosis and remediation. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Special education is diagnosis and remediation. When an issue shows up, what is going on with that issue? How are we going to respond to that issue? And we have built a huge special education mechanism over the decades around that core concept, diagnosis and remediation. I'm going to go back a second. Let's go back to the 1950s one more time and talk about this idea that was also emerging then called the public health framework, or that we're referring to as a public health framework. It was this idea, not about schools at the time, but about a three-tiered logic model, asking questions of, what about the environment? Can we predict and prevent conditions to improve outcomes for all? And can we be more efficient at it, more effective at it? And from the Surgeon General's office, the questions are looking at heart disease and smoking. And one of the early publications on this was about psychiatry. What can we do to be preventative in a multi-tiered approach? And that's called the public health framework. And during the COVID pandemic, this was very visible. If you had this mindset, you could see how, as a country, we were looking at it from a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 perspective. So it still fits today. Zoom forward again, 1997. Let me pause for a second. In the 1980s and the 1990s, professors of special education at the University of Oregon, Hill Walker and others, looked at that public health framework and said, well, what about special education and what about schools? And can we, instead of focusing on diagnosis or mediation, what if we focus on the environment to prevent problem behaviors, to set ourselves up for success, to be more efficient and more effective. That late 80s, mid 90s, some preliminary ideas started emerging, and in 1997, PBIS was referenced for the first time federally in the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And in 1998, the Center on PBIS was established from the U.S. Department of Ed. Say, what do we need to know about this? Is this something that is going to be useful and effective at improving our schools? I also like to point out that the Center on PBIS is funded out of the Office of Special Education Programs. It's the only initiative, at the time at least, that was funded out of OSEP, but targets 100% of our population. Because in many ways, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the very ideas of special ed. At least that, again, from diagnosis and remediation to this idea of environment and prevention. You guys are probably all experts in multi-tiered prevention and what multi-tiered means. I just like to point, well, you have to have a triangle, but also I like to point out that tier 1 is what are we doing for all to get our, and then fill in the blank for you. What are the outcomes? You want to be respectful? Do you want to be ready to learn? Do you want to be academically engaged? What are your 3 to 5 expectations you're going after? Tier 1 is like, what are we doing to get everybody there? Tier 2 in this approach is how do we intensify that tier 1? How do we increase the dose or the frequency or identify the students? So tier 2, it's important to note, is more of tier 1, more specific, but it's very connected. Tier 2 is not different. It's not, oh, we're going to change what we're going for here, different outcomes. But no, it's building on tier 1. And then tier 3 is the individualization of instruction in order to, again, go back to those same school-wide expectations. I also like to talk about in the history. Does anybody remember, Minnesota's been at this for a long time. We used to throw around terms like red kids and high flyers. Anybody? I have presentations that I did a long time ago that was pretty chock full of that type of language. And I'm appreciative that this is a science-based approach and we do better and we learn. And over those years, we have learned that even the way we thought about tiers at the time is not quite correct. Kids are not in tiers. We don't have a tier 1 student, a tier 2 student, or a tier 3 student. That's important to note. Just like in public health, you don't have a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 person. So this is a great example by George Sugai that he shared a long time ago. I reference it often, and I think it can really emphasize this point that you take one student, this is one student, and you can see they're successful with the tier 1 supports they get for adult relationships and PE and problem solving and orchestra and anxiety and asking assistance. They need tier 2 supports though for their attendance. They need tier 3 supports in distracting others and in language arts. So the interventions are in the tiers, not the students. And that to me is always helpful to note. And a fun activity for schools kicking off this year, if this is important to you to think, can we improve our language around our students? Can we think of our students as multifaceted, strength-based? Encourage your teachers to engage in this activity too. We're all human here, and I can think of things that I need individual supports for, and I can think of things that I do really well with my, what everybody else gets supports, my tier 1. That's a helpful way for me to think about this idea of multi-tiered supports. So again, 1997, PBIS was referenced federally. What does it mean? Here's the most succinct version I can come up with. It's organizing your school to integrate your initiatives, targeting your identified and meaningful outcomes by understanding data, systems, and practices, and prioritizing equity. So we call those the 5 essential elements of PBIS. When Minnesota began this work, what were we really talking about? Acting out behaviors, externalizing behaviors. I really like my emoji work here, by the way. This is sophisticated. I feel like my kids would be proud. So that's what we're talking about. Office discipline referrals. By the way, still a great measure. Office discipline referrals continue to be very useful in asking questions about the climate and the culture of the building. And that really was our emphasis as we got started, but it didn't stay there for very long. because then that logic was applied to anxiety and depression and internalizing behaviors, things that office discipline referrals are not great at finding for us, but we know are supports needed. And even in the aughts, we were asking these questions of what would be a better data sources so we could apply this logic in supporting all students in their growth. So we're talking here social, emotional, behavioral. Guarding those three things, we can think about that as synonymous with mental health. And I think that that's an important note too, because in the last decade or more, the pressure put on schools and educators and community systems to address mental health can feel stifling. If I'm a teacher in my classroom, it can feel like one more thing. And teachers have been doing mental health work all along. It's really about how we think about it and phrase it. The direct instruction behavior, giving students the skills and teaching them things like self-regulation and emotional management, how to ask for help. Those are social, emotional, behavioral skills. And when you take those things together, that is the representation of one's mental health, both the competencies you have as well as the challenges you have in those areas. So actually schools are in a great position and educators are in a wonderful spot to be impacting and supporting mental health when we put it through this lens of direct instruction. And that, again, through the aughts, 2010s, etc. I went in the Wayback Machine and found this visual. I remember working on something like this and an unnecessary amount of conversations we were having on whether that triangle should have a line splitting it down the middle. Good times. And I think we left it there. Well, obviously we did because we have this visual. I also find this awesome when I look at what's actually we're saying on either side. We're not differentiating this in any way. This is both a very telling graphic, not super helpful in today's context, though. Like, what are we really saying about academic systems and behavior systems? But back in the aughts, what we were saying is we know this is not just about behavior. Multi-tiered can be applied to academics as well. We just didn't have the research and the supports and the right language for it necessarily at the time. So the reason I'm pointing this out is integrating MTSS is not new. These ideas have been around. The language is changing, but the research is in some ways just starting to ask some of the right questions about it. And the examples are just starting to emerge, and we have a long way to go. What we do know about PBIS, though, the research from that body of work is substantial. And over these years, we can see how PBIS as an MTSS framework is really successful at aligning what's important to your district and schools and what are your initiatives. And so just as an example, this is what often schools will look at their PBIS, and we don't want a PBIS intervent. We don't in our schools want PBIS. Separately, we're going to do restorative practices. Separately, we're going to be doing a mindfulness minute that has nothing to do with our school-wide expectations. We want to make sure that we're integrating those things together. And so it helps us remember that when MTSS comes along and this idea of, well, why are we separating our academic and our behavior systems? If I'm a district, that's a question that I'm going to have. Can we be more efficient if we combine these things together? Can we be more effective? Well, let's kind of see what we know for right now. In 2015, MTSS was referenced, I think, federally, maybe for one of the first times in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Just do any little search on it right now, and you can see a good 50 different examples of what MTSS means. Pretty significant how different that is from PBIS, which is universally defined and research. But MTSS is more conceptual right now and is different in Minnesota, how it's defined, compared to California, compared to Colorado, compared to Florida. The states are looking at it differently. But so many states are leaning in because they're asking really important questions. Can we learn? I'm sorry, can we use what we've learned over the last 20 years through PBIS? Just keep that to yourselves if you want, to improve our MTSS and our academic outcomes as well. That's 2015. Right around that time in 2016, if you've seen the book from McIntosh and Goodman, Integrating Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, great reference. It really helped for the last 10 years for us to think about this idea. And I've used this visual for a long time. I think I made, well, it says that 2019 was the last time it was updated, but I think I used it before that. I've always loved this visual. But when I was thinking about integrated MTSS, I started honing in on what's not in the common space in the middle. Look on the academic RTI side. Focus on grade level teaming. That academics are academic implementation is really good at grade by grade by grade work and that small teaming at the grade level. We also knew that academic RTI was focusing on special education eligibility and determination approach. So the assessments in academics, exceptional, really good. It's easier to look at how are my students doing in terms of reading and in terms of math and language acquisition. On PBIS, what's the emphasis been on? School-wide teaming, prevention, individual interventions where needed, and the indirect assessment of behavior. A little bit different. We use discipline referrals or nurse visits and screening and things like that to get a pulse for what's going on. But that's a little different than knowing exactly student by student by student where they're at, right? So I think this is a really helpful look at some of the early thinking around integrated MTSS, and even these 6 items showing the overlap is great. And yet here, almost 8 years later, 9 years later, we still are trying to figure out how do we incorporate what is great about academic MTSS with what we know works in social emotional behavior MTSS. We haven't really gotten to what's a good teaming structure that honors that academic work at those grade levels, for example. So we're working. Doesn't mean there aren't great examples out there. Maybe some folks on today's on this Zoom are confident in what they're doing, but from a research lens, we're barely getting started. This was published last year. I'm sure things are moving fast, but as of right now, asking the question about when we integrate behavior in academics, what do we know? 10 studies, less than 10 studies. And what are we really talking about? This is about reading. And honestly, K through 2, K through 5. There's a few more. If some of our other colleagues could update this, but this highlights how this really is a new area, and we have a long way to go. And we all think like, oh, this makes sense. Let's just keep mashing these two things together. And we're figuring that out together. Doesn't mean we actually have a blueprint or a roadmap. States have written things out, but it's our best guesses right now. Compare that to the research on PBIS. Recently at the center, we've created an interactive database of research. And so if you go on this page, I have a couple links below. You can click on any of these variables at the top and it'll tell you, I want to see tier 2 and I want to see high schools. Or I want to see tier 3 and I want to see academic achievement. And it'll just sort the resources below. So that's what this page is. We actually have culled the list. I can't say that word really well. Culled? You guys get it. We have narrowed down the list to really focus on things that were quite explicit about PBIS itself as a framework. The second link I have here was our 2020 spreadsheet that we had, hundreds and hundreds of research articles there, and a little bit more broadly defined about behavior in schools. So a couple different versions to look at. But if you're looking at a dissertation coming up, I have the resources here for you. Work has been done. Jump in there. Okay. So I just point that out because integrating MTSS, I want to be thinking about that for the next 2 decades. I'm very excited about that work. And looking back for the last 2 decades, look at what we've accomplished in understanding social, emotional, behavior supports and how to do it well. So much so that we have proven outcomes. If you implement PBIS with fidelity, you know that you will achieve, compared to other similar schools, better academic achievement, pro-social skills, improved attendance, emotional regulation, etc. You reduce exclusionary discipline, suspensions and expulsions. Teachers are happier. They feel more confident in their work. And the key for this is implementation with fidelity. And so as I think about where we're at in our timeline for all of us in our careers, we're at this pivotal point where MTSS is the new acronym. I like it. I think it makes sense. PBIS is an MTSS framework. And yet, let's not throw out what we know works while we're learning. Can we continue to do things efficiently and effectively? To me, that's one of the key messages. And so I thought it could be helpful at this point. We'll shift from the history lesson. Feel free to send me your notes on anything I butchered there. And let's talk a little bit about, so what do we know about integrated MTSS? We have great partners around the country that are digging into this research. Again, K-5, mostly reading, a little bit of math, but it's a good start to what we know. So let's talk a little bit here. Frameworks themselves. Why invest in a framework? Maybe what are these things? Look at this alphabet soup. I even threw an ISF here. I don't even know if I'll say it again after this, but it was on my slide. Fun little thing. There's probably more. Anybody see this slide before? We've used this at the National Forum and other places. I love it. All right, you have all of these pieces. Okay, not going to get you very far if you have to go leave the house and get groceries. As soon as you have there's no basket there. You're going to carry the groceries in your backpack. With a framework, putting these pieces together, we have the interventions where the rubber meets the road, coaching, let's steer that. We have implementation, the pedals, we're driving. Who's in the seat? That's the team making decisions. With the school leadership, that's the gear shifter. Brilliant idea. Don Kincaid or others helped come up with this. I love it. Ultimately, what we're talking about, though, is systems thinking. Peter Senge from MIT, who's kind of just a world thinker, talks about this, that systems thinking is a discipline for seeing the whole. It's a framework for relationships rather than things, seeing patterns of change. And the visual I have here shows on the left the chaos of everything we're responsible for in schools. And this idea of, can we look at it as a system? Can we organize it? Can we simplify it to make it easier for ourselves and our students and their families? The other thing I would like to point out here is that whatever outcomes you're getting right now in your school, those are exactly the result of how your school is designed. Every school is getting the outcomes it's set up to get right now. A way I like to think about this is, if let's say you have 500 students in your school, and we said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and swap them out with 500 different students from our community. You'll get the exact same outcomes you're getting now. Right? It's not about the kids. Now that means your successes. That's the things that are going well, they'll go well with your new 500 students. But that also means the challenges. So what we're really looking at is not trying to figure out how do we solve the student, but rather how do we look at the system and the results it's creating and adjust the system to improve our outcomes. And that's this big idea of attending to a framework. So PBIS can be thought about as an operating system from your schools. And as an MTSS framework, you can look at it and take your academic components and slot it in and think about it through this systems approach. What do we know about PBIS outcomes? What is meaningfully important to your school and your community? It's not for me to tell you it should be ready, responsible, and safe. It's for you to make decisions about what are the expectations that are important. What are our goals? What are we being charged to do? The systems are, what is the teaming structure? How are we making decisions? And what's the professional development and coaching that we're going to provide to our staff? Let's ask the right questions about those things. Practices is the continuum of evidence-based practices that are going to be used and interventions. Why do we have that? Well, because no one thing works for every person. So we have to layer supports based on need. Data is asking the questions about, are those practices and is your overall framework implemented with fidelity? And what results are you getting? And equity is asking, is this culturally responsive and equitable in both the inputs and the outputs? So I love this idea. It's an operating system for your school. It's simple. It's well organized. I think we can think of MTSSA, academic MTSS, through this lens, or we could take these ideas and sort of morph them with our academic MTSS as well. You might find people who say PBIS is old. I don't do that anymore. I don't like PBIS anymore. It's, it's no longer cool. I don't know if people talk like that, but whatever. When they say that, it's a simple conversation to ask, what are the things you're not on board with? That we shouldn't identify important outcomes to you. We shouldn't support adults with systems. We shouldn't define our practices. We don't want to look at data or things, or we don't want to address disparities in our system. Those are the questions, because that's what it's about. Oftentimes when folks say they don't like PBIS, they're connecting to very specific practices that either they didn't do with fidelity or were misapplied or were misperceived as that's all PBIS is. Token economies and making it rain tickets and things like that. Okay. Those are practices. That's part of the selection process in the middle. So that's this idea. Integrated MTSS. If we were in a big room, I'd say raise your hand if you've heard of the Integrated MTSS Research Network that is co-led by Brandy Simonson and Steve. Oh, thank you, Aaron. I only see 5 people, but you raise your hand, so I see you. Thank you. That's co-led by Brandy Simonson and Steve Goodman, who are both, Brandy is a co-director of the Center on PBIS as well. Steve is one of our long-term partners and was the author with Kent McIntosh in that 2016 book as well. So when they started this work, a differently funded project, a small little study out of the US Department of Ed to start asking key questions about integrating MTSS, I got excited because now I'm thinking, oh, we got some great people at the helm here who are going to be helping ask questions. AIR is connected to this work. Missouri is connected to this work. So really great thought leaders in this area. And what they've defined here is looking at IMTSS. Feel free not to use the I. That's a whole separate conversation. It can just be called MTSS, but it sort of depends on where you're coming from. But integrating MTSS is the intentional integration of the academic and the behavioral supports that are in place. We know MTSSA, in their terms, is the infrastructure to use data to match academic assessment to student need. And MTSSB is the efficacy of the PBIS framework for achieving social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health outcomes. The idea here is, by combining the two, can we be more efficient with our very limited resources in districts and schools? They have, so we have the 5 PBIS essential elements that I showed on a previous slide, these. They have what their components of an integrated MTSS are. And for them, it's integrating a continuum of practices, comprehensive data decision making, integrating your teams, integrating your professional development, and then attending to additional systems. It's hard to wrap our heads around this, but those things are not a replacement for these. These components are asking, how do you integrate those PBIS elements? That word integration is key as you see it throughout this list. So it feels like instead of making things easier, it's making it a little bit more complicated. I feel the push and pull of that. But that's okay. We're trying to make sense of all this because the question that this group is asking is, what do we mean by the integration of the work? And can we hone in on that? How do you bring behavior and academics together? So These visuals will be available. There is a bunch of additional resources that I've linked here, and this is one. I love this one. It is a 2-page document that explains each of their components. I've sat with many district leadership teams, and we just did a think, pair, share, highlight, take notes. What does this mean to us in terms of the work we've been doing in PBIS and where we want to go with MTSS? So I just want to highlight that here. I think it's a really helpful resource. Something that we wrote up a little while ago at Midwest PBIS was a 2-page document that explained MTSSA, PBIS, what else do we have in there? Integrated Systems Framework, ISF, a mental health integration piece. And so again, a little sort of half-page summaries of what those frameworks might be. This feels still pretty drafty to me, I'm not going to lie. But useful resource, again, could be helpful at a little think, pair, share conversation you want to have with your school or district. So let's take a step back and say, based on all of that work and those definitions of integrating MTSS, what do we think we know? See how I'm trying to protect myself here? This stuff moves fast. But I was talking with Brandy and Steve, and we've dug into this and we've shared resources back and forth. And I pulled this together based on our conversation, shared it with them, and they use it as well. But this is what we think we know about integrating it. One, very popular. Everybody's doing it. Get on board. Don't worry about the fact that we don't have any research or it's limited. Just it's exciting. So that's one thing we know. We know it's inconsistently defined. Even the MTSS just by itself across the research, when they say MTSS means these things, it's different from research to research to research. And so that just kind of shows we're at the beginning stages here. But what we do know is that there are overlapping complements. What we know about MTSS academic, where it's really strong for outcome measures on individual practices. And what we know about MTSS for behavior, great with systems, great with installation, there's implementation science, there's consistency, there's fidelity measures. We know that those things complement each other. MTSSA is identifying some gaps MTSSB doesn't have, and vice versa. We know that our teaching between those two things differ. We also know that the teaming, like how do we team around this? How do we be a fit? How do we set up our school and multi-tiered conversations? That is still a Wild West. Finally, we also know that measuring the fidelity of the integration of MTSS does not replace measuring the fidelity of your social, emotional, behavioral framework. It's like a framework for a framework. And that's really key. Will we get there soon? There's some promising efforts out there right now, but nothing yet that has the rich research base of how we measure fidelity in PBIS right now. So if you're going to look at on this page, wait for it. Well, I think the link's in here. I have an infer connection to how they assess these integration components. That tool is really about assessing the integration, that capital I there. You still have to attend to what do we know works in PBIS. I love this quote from Steve. If you have a chance, he's kind and brilliant and just rattles this stuff off as if he's just breathing. And I think it's great. And I wrote it down right after I talked to him one time. I sent it back to him like, how did I do, Steve? We know that many students have co-occurring difficulties in academic and SCB domains, and they cannot be adequately addressed unless we pay attention to the connection interaction between those. What Steve was responding to is schools and districts, they might be asking themselves, can we be more efficient in what we do here? Is it helpful to have one framework rather than multiple frameworks, different things for academics and behavior, et cetera? And Steve is pointing out, and for many students, they actually need that integration. You have to connect the two. we cannot address their needs unless we're tending to both academics and behavior together. And so it's almost like in our responsibility to be asking these questions. And I like that he put it back in that lens, taking it out of just the efficiency conversation. So a couple ideas here. Again, summarizing that last page, PBIS is thoroughly defined. We know exactly what it is. We know what works in PBIS. It's not done. Research continues. We'll talk about the TFI 3.0 later today if you want to go to that session. We learn a lot, but we have a strong research base. The academic side, really good individual student measures and individual practices. Pretty good at grade level teaming, examples like that. What we have together is more of a promising logic. Okay. Couple examples from Brandy that I think are useful is, again, why do we want to integrate? Because we think if we improve academic skills, it can improve social emotional behavioral skills and vice versa. We know that those practices for both of those can be connected. There's a really great resource here for that effective academic instruction is a protective factor regarding social emotional and behavioral functioning. So good academic instruction is key to our SEB outcomes as well. And so some more rationales if you're into that conversation. Brandon and Steve thought about this too in terms of, so what do we know right now and what's the promise? We know that PBIS gets meaningful SEB outcomes. Academic outcomes, we see correlation, which we love, but measuring exactly that this behavior intervention results in this academic growth, we have a long way to go in understanding that type of work. RTI isn't looking at those behavioral outcomes, but is demonstrating meaningful academic outcomes in the area of literacy. Right? Again, that's where the most of the focus has been. And when we implement them together, that's the question is, will we connect those two things? Okay. This was written in 2021. And it's just a simple 2-page document that asks the question, why do we prioritize behavior support? And even though we're being recorded, and I want to make this a secret among all of us, it will get out there. The idea behind this document, I think, was really addressing the move for social emotional learning, the SEL, and how many of your schools and districts still separate? Oh, we do our behavior supports here, and we do our SEL here, where we don't think of those things as the same thing. And the idea behind this page was to say, don't forget about behavior. If you want to invest in SEL, remember it's behavior that gets students most often excluded from the learning environment. The manifestation of your social and your emotional learning is what we see, and that is what impacts education. But when you reread this article, it doesn't actually mention SEL. It is just as applicable to this MTSS conversation. So if you're focusing on integrating MTSS, I understand that. I support that. I would be asking the same question. Don't forget about behavior. Don't do it to the deficit of what we know works for supporting students. Great little 2-page article that reinforces that point. Okay. About 15 minutes here. Well, did I get that right? Yeah, 20 minutes here. So let me give you some suggestions on, so then what? So where do we go from here? If I'm an educator, I'm thinking about my school or an administrator, where do I go with all of this information? Okay. In general, we love this idea of working smarter. So easy to say it, by the way. Just work smarter, not harder. Yet, the actual work of schools is really quite hard for a lot of reasons. But when we think about working smarter, a couple ideas have always come to mind. Do less, but do that better, right? Let's focus on doing things less and once. Invest in things for 10 years. Invest in really defined outcomes. What's important to our schools? What are we going after? Be clear about that. And I love this idea of invest in a sure thing. Fidelity of PBIS is a sure thing for improving climate and culture, if we're there. And then let's be strategic. So I'll go back to this idea. When I talk about investing in a sure thing, I already showed you this visual, but just highlighting it again. The links below on this document are the connections to many of those resources, plus various spreadsheets if you want to, again, work on that dissertation if you're implementing with Fidelity. So here are some steps I think that would be useful to consider as you're integrating. One, always assess Fidelity. Continue using the TFI and action plan accordingly. We don't have a one tool to rule them all yet. Even the ones that are in development stages have really a long way to go in terms of what we know about those tools. But what we do have is the tiered fidelity inventory, and it is a great blueprint for organizing your school for social emotional behavior outcomes. So one, continue to do that. The second thing I'll talk about here is your teaming. I don't have something to show you that says this is how you integrate academic and social emotional behavioral teaming. We don't have that yet. Haven't really scratched the surface. That's a learn with opportunity right now with your districts and schools. Again, lean into what we know, what we've done with teaming for tier 1, 2, and tier 1, 2, and 3 for social emotional behavior, but honor what works in academics. What do we know about grade level teaming, for example? And how do these things, how should these be explicitly connected to each other so they're efficient and they're effective? Map your social, emotional behavior, academic practices across your tiers. We've been doing that for a long time. Integrating your social, emotional behavior practices within your academic instruction, that's an area that this can attend to. So those would be the questions I'd be asking as I think about this work. I'll unpack a few of them for a little bit. Regarding fidelity, I don't know if anybody on this, I'm sure you didn't come to the Institute thinking, why does fidelity matter? You probably didn't. We're speaking to the choir here, I'm assuming. But it turns out, if you didn't know this, checklists are helpful. Do you know that when you got on an airplane, your pilots go through a pre-flight checklist? And that was developed in response to crashes decades ago. It turned out that if you just give pilots a quick little, do the engines work? I don't know what these are, by the way. I'm making these up as I go. Did you check the adjuster thingy? All the right buttons switched. Did we turn the air conditioning on? That's probably not on the checklist, but it should be. That simple process, the pre-flight checklist, saved countless lives. Even though pilots are really experienced in what they do, it's just a little quick reminder. Same thing for a great research study for the World Health Organization on surgery. If you have had to go into surgery, even something local, and you're maybe they're putting you out, you might hear some conversations like, Brian, can you tell us your name? You're like, Brian, where are we doing the surgery on today? And you're like, my left knee, as you're going to sleep. They're doing their little checklist. Do we have the right person on the bed? Do we know what we're doing right now? Is everything clean? I don't know if they asked that question, by the way. They should. Again, that type of checklist, a simple set of questions, reduces mortality. We know checklists are helpful. And it turns out we have a substantially effective checklist for social emotional behavior and culture and climate in schools. It's called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. It's exceptional. It defines what do we know works in schools. This was created a little while ago, but I like how it sort of flips the script a little bit. It asks the question, well, what did we learn from the TFI? And sometimes if you're trying to remind your school why we're using this tool or how it's useful, or in the past, the BOQ, benchmarks of quality, or other similar tools, this is a great example, at least for tier 1 and how it connects. So I want to know in a school, who is responsible for the planning, the implementation, and monitoring of the climate and culture in the school? Well, when you complete the TFI and you answer tier item 1.1, that's what it tells us. Or let's jump down. Are staff consistent in how they interpret and respond to problem behaviors? Adult consistency matters in terms of problem behaviors. Well, those are items 1.5 and 1.6. And we can keep going through some of those. So again, the TFI is wonderful. In the effort to integrate your work, let's not lose sight of this. Let's stay committed to it while over the next decade, we learn more about additional tools and options. Completing the TFI, sometimes we do that for recognition from the state or other things like that. Completing it Great. Tells us a lot of information. Having an action plan for the TFI is what matters. So then what? Hey, we were at a 1 on our team operating procedures. Is that important to us? Should we be tightening that up a little bit? Do we want to work on our starting on time or documenting our database decisions? So let's make sure we have an action plan. Anytime a school reaches out and they say, we're doing PBIS, and I would love to say the 2 questions. Great, what's your current fidelity? And when they say, what is that? I don't know. I'm like, okay, we have a big gap. Or if they have fidelity, I say, awesome. What are your current action items? What are your priorities? What's your action plan? Schools that have those 2 things in place, honestly, aren't reaching out for technical assistance as much. They sort of have it. They're like, oh, we know. Assess, action plan, implement. So if you're looking for a nice little tool, there's nothing brilliant about this at all. It's just a table, but it's got some fun drop downs. We have one there that you can just grab and you can put all 3 tiers together and keep track of your action items, etc. Or make your own. All right, so that was the first step in what we do with integrating MTSS. Teaming. Said it's the wild. Did I say it's the Wild West? I use that phrase a lot. I don't know if I use it today. We don't know. We don't know the best approach to integrating teaming just yet. Brandy and Steve and I talked about that a while back. I'm like, I thought maybe they had the answer. So I'm like, would you point me to the right spot that would say the one way we do this? And they're like, well, maybe that should be part of the next 5-year cycle. But what we do know is there's a lot on this slide, by the way. So avert your eyes if it's hurting. But what we do know is that in the social emotional behavior side, there are necessary conversations. There's a tier 1 whole school conversation. There's a tier 2 systems conversation, picking, monitoring, deselecting the tier 2 interventions that are needed. And then there's a tier 3 systems conversation and individual student support conversation. And this type of work has been researched for quite some time, but we need to think about for this, is it just enough to say what are the academic components involved here, or are there other teaming components that we have to attend to in schools? So again, I don't have the answers for this, but I wouldn't get rid of what we know works. I would ask some hard questions about how do we combine those things together. All right, the third thing that I mentioned was mapping your social emotional behavior practices and interventions across tiers. It's kind of a fun visual we've used in the past, but when I start with a district, I'm like, tell me about what's going on in your district. Which one of these things best describes the supports you currently have in place? And districts are really different from one another. We are not sure what our supports are all the way to, yeah, it's a hot mess. We're doing everything. Number 2, right? But it's good to think about this. And districts then often will say, okay, let's start to map it out. Maybe we'll go even school by school. District is better, but if we can't, we'll go school by school. What are we doing on the academic side for supports, and what are we doing on the behavior side? And so this is just an example, curriculum and instruction audit. I grabbed this from a district I was working with recently, and then they put up big posters and everybody was working on them. This is not new though. This idea of both the academic and the behavior side. This is a slide. I wish I had the dates for this slide. 2012, maybe? A long time ago. High school district, exceptional job of saying what's in place. And they even did it by intensity as well. I'm sorry, they did it by fidelity of implementation as well. So on the left-hand side of this is academics. On the right-hand side is behavior. We have tiers, who's responsible for each tier. If it's in a dotted line, well, we're still working on figuring out what that is. I mean, what a great map from a high school, a large high school, to communicate to its community. What are all the things we're doing for your students? Again, been around a long time, but it doesn't mean it's integrated. Just because we have these things side by side doesn't mean we're using the practices on the behavior side within our academic instruction. And scripting that for educators is really quite essential. So I'm going to show an example, real simple example of what I'm talking about here. Students, but teachers too, really benefit when we script those core behavior practices within their academic instruction. How do I prompt students? How do I engage students? And how do I make this learning more meaningful? This is from the IMTSS network. Again, think K through 5, mostly focused on reading. I can't even read this. I have a huge monitor in front of me. You can see it on the slides though. But what we're looking at here is a lesson plan where these little links, these little aqua colored links are prompts to the teacher about behavior prompt here, a praise or an error correction opportunity here, practicing. So it's within the lesson plan. This is how you set yourselves up for success and use those behavioral skills we know. The big idea when we integrate is what works on the social emotional behavior side and how do we make that visible in our academic instruction. Another example is a classroom that I was in, and 6th grade math. The objective was using. I've talked about this one for years. Using the number properties to simplify expressions. I don't know if I know what that means. I'm behaviorist. It's okay, but some of your math teachers do. And the teacher, they were doing bell-to-bell teaching, and the students came in, and which is getting them started right away. And the teacher and the students came in. Great, you're starting class right away. You have a 4-minute number properties activity. You're going to start on your own. Today's Wilson Way expectation is being responsible. What that's going to look like right now is focusing your own work. Who can tell me what that looks like? And the student's like, eyes on my page. Another one is not talking to the neighbor, getting done within 4 minutes. Awesome. Great. Get started. I'm going to walk around and look for that skill. I mean, that was 15 seconds. Kids did a quick response. Backpacks were still over the shoulder, and they're working on a getting started right away activity on their desk. What an amazing integration, though, of school ed expectations within the context of academic instruction. So love that as an example. When we do things such as mapping our interventions, academics and behavior, like these, on the behavior side, we've been pretty good at asking ourselves questions like, how many students are in each of these interventions? What does success look like? What percent of students in each intervention are showing success? Because that's an efficiency conversation. Why have an intervention if only 10% of the students are succeeding in it? And I've made some assumptions over the years that on the academic side, they're asking those same questions, but it's not always true. We have academic interventions, but we're not necessarily aggregating it all together or looking at the intervention itself. Are we doing this intervention with fidelity? So one of the things we can do, and we do this on the behavior side, is when you list all of those practices that you're doing, social, emotional behavior, and academic, do you have information to answer, is it being implemented with fidelity? And what are the outcomes we're getting? What are we saying is going to be better because of it? So this is an example of how we do that in social emotional behavior, and it could be extended to the academic side as well. So a whole bunch of practices here. And then on 10/24, we did a walkthrough, and 92% of the classrooms had it in place. And we asked students if they knew the expectations, 84% on that day, so that they knew them. So we're seeing it. Here's the practice. We're doing it with fidelity. Or we have a positive corrective ratio, 5 to, I think there's praise the corrections ratio. And we're aiming for 5 to 1. We did peer observations, and only 54% of staff were hitting a 5 to 1 ratio. By the way, pat yourselves in the back if you're at 54% for that. That would be that's hard to get to. But what we're looking at is discipline ODRs, and we're not happy with this result of 12% of our students are earning ODRs. So we want to focus on the fidelity of that intervention. That's just an example, mapping out. And we can do that with our academic instruction as well. And I have districts right now who are realizing, hey, we've done this on this side of the MTSS. Why don't we ask those same questions here on the other side? So, overall summary, kind of where we're at here. I encourage us as we engage in this IMTSS work together. Let's leverage what we know in PBIS, continue to use that to integrate our initiatives. And I'm referring to MTSSA as an initiative here. That might not be fair. Let's look at these things as equals, bringing them together. But doing that to achieve our targeted outcomes. And by using that framework, this is what we have attended to over the years through PBIS. Efficiency and effectiveness, being consistent with our adults, driving decision-making with data, continuous improvement, and then aligning those and any other initiatives that you currently have. One thing I want to also say here for those participating is lean into your supports. So I have the pleasure and the honor of working with the Minnesota State Leadership Team. And that's by design that our national center is connected to all of the states. And the state leadership team in turn says, how do we do regional support? And how do we design consistency for district support? And how do we attend to the evaluation of this work? And you guys are doing an exceptional job. So if you're at your school right now, you should be leaning on your district. If you're at your district, you should be looking at your regional supports. What can we learn together? And in turn, that's what's organized through the state. So again, a little bit of a thank you to the state of Minnesota and MDE for the work you guys have been doing for those years. So that's sort of big summary where I would wrap up. It'd be awesome if I could see everybody here and you could raise your hands and say, what are your action steps from today? But I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Brian. I've got lots of light bulbs going off in my head. That was really, really wonderful. Since we have just a couple of minutes, you're open to questions?
Of course.
Okay, so are there any questions that anyone has? You're welcome to unmute or put them in the chat. Maybe there's just so much thinking going on after all of the information that you shared, Brian.
When you publish this recording, put it through a filter to make me sound more mature than I am. Okay? I'm anxious about that.
I think you got that. I think there's a lot of things. I really appreciated all of the different things that you brought together today because we don't always have the opportunity to do that in all of the spaces that we're in. So from your perspective, being able to bring all of these things together is really helpful, I know, to all of our teams, I think. And so I'm sure there will continue to be questions, so please reach out if you do have things as you're thinking about how to do this. Any of the things that Brian was talking about, reach out to those supports that Brian highlighted in that last slide there. So thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate you. We appreciate you being here with us today. We will now transition. We have a little bit of a break until 10:25. So with each of our between each presentation today, we're just having a 10-minute transition break. So if Angie or Tamara, if you can put in the chat the other link, that would be awesome. So if you want to attend, the next session in here is going to be Fostering Psychological Safety in Schools, Impact on Student Behavior. You stay in this link here. Do not change. That will be the presentation on this link. If you want to attend the next session with Brian on why the TFI 3.0 was developed and what we have learned about PBIS fidelity since the previous version, we're going to move Brian and that presentation over to the other link. So please join us in there if that is the presentation you want to attend. Otherwise, take a break and choose your next session, and we will see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Right.
And Brian, I'm going to transition over there as well, so I'll see you in a minute. And team, I'm moving over. You guys got this. Thank you.